Do presidential debates change elections? Thanks to our partners at the University of Virginia's Miller Center, we've assembled an all-star panel to discuss that question. To my right, as always, is George Will. And to my left, Democratic strategist Donna Brazile, who as Al Gore's campaign manager in 2000 was instrumental in preparing the vice president to debate George W. Bush. Next to Donna, we're joined by two former presidential candidates, former House Speaker Newt Gingrich, who debated Mitt Romney countless times while battling him for the Republican presidential nomination, and former Connecticut Senator Chris Dodd, who squared off with Barack Obama during the 2008 presidential primaries. Presidential historian Richard Norton Smith of George Mason University is also here. And finally, we're especially pleased to be joined by ABC senior foreign affairs correspondent Martha Raddatz. Martha, of course, expertly moderated the vice presidential debate in Kentucky just 3 nights ago. And Martha, BuzzFeed gave you the nickname Badass Super Moderator. So let's give Martha a huge round of applause. And as you just saw, we have a great audience here at the Museum's Night Studio. Thanks to all of you for joining us this morning. The big question we're discussing today, do presidential debates change elections? Do they matter?
The answer at first blush seems simple. Of course debates matter. The candidates spend weeks, if not months, preparing. TV audiences are enormous. 67 million tuned in for the first meeting between Romney and Obama. And afterwards, even in our Twitter-fueled short attention span news cycle, the debates have staying power. Even the candidates themselves dwell on their debate performances years, decades even later. Here's Richard Nixon in 1971, rueing the lack of preparation that led to that sweaty, uncomfortable performance against Jack Kennedy 11 years before.
Running schedule so hard, we didn't learn to the other. We're never going to come to
And yet, for all the hype, political scientists and pollsters say there's little evidence debates make much difference in election outcomes. In an analysis of the debates held in the 10 presidential contests between 1960 and 2008, ABC News found just one where a debate appeared to switch the lead in the polls by a significant margin. It was 1980.
Are you better off than you were 4 years ago?
When then-Governor Ronald Reagan uttered that now-famous line. President Obama hopes that one exception remains the only one.
That debate, what happened?
Well, Governor Romney had a good night. I had a bad night.
How bad?
Well, it's not the first time I've had a bad night, but I think what's important is that the fundamentals of what this race is about haven't changed.
So, George, Karl Rove wrote in the Wall Street Journal this week that the first debate will be seen as the decision point in this election. Do we make too big a deal out of debates, or does Mr. Rove have a point?
Well, we make too big a deal in the sense that it is hard to argue that debates test or reveal aptitudes that are pertinent to the performance of presidential duties. That said, debates now are semi-constitutional events. That is, you cannot become president without participating in them. Didn't exist till 1960. Now they are, as I say, semi-constitutional. Clearly, in close elections, 60, 76, 2000, it's perfectly plausible to say that they caused enough change to be the margin of difference. With regard to this year's, it's too soon to say whether the surge that Mitt Romney got from his debate performance will be evanescent or not. If it is durable, it will be because I think usually what happens in debates that matter is they catalyze an inchoate feeling the electorate had, and then it becomes articulate and present and powerful.
Donna, you were campaign manager for then Vice President Al Gore. How important were those debates?
Well, first of all, you notice I was holding my breath when you said that. I didn't want to have any audible sigh for fear that I might split screen with this handsome man sitting to my left, and God knows what will happen if the two of us are ever, on a, I'm Dancing with the Stars. I'll take the lead, by the way. There's no question, they do matter, because millions of viewers are tuning in for the first time. They get an opportunity to look at these two men, so far men, and to take a look at whether or not what they've heard on TV or watched over the past few weeks is actually true. So they matter, and that's why And we spent a lot of time rehearsing, prepping, and trying to get 3 months of sound bites into 2 minutes so that they come across as concise and clear and a little energetic.
Speaker Gingrich, you debated many, many times against Mitt Romney. You were widely seen as a strong debater. But then came Florida.
I'm not anti-immigrant. My father was born in Mexico. My wife's father was born in Wales. They came to this country. The idea that I'm anti-immigrant is repulsive. Don't use a term like that.
A very forceful performance by Mitt Romney. What did you learn from that experience that Barack Obama needs to know?
My wife Calista kept saying that if he were as prepared and as aggressive with Obama as he was, the 2 debates that were life and death for him, he won. In terms of, I won a lot of debates. When he finally got down to the crunch, he did what he had to do. He was very aggressive. He was very assertive. What was a surprise to me was not that Romney was as good as he was. I thought he was, people underestimated. This guy went to both Harvard Business School and Harvard Law School simultaneously. He's a very hardworking, very methodical person. The big surprise to me was the emptiness on the other side. I mean, what made that debate so startling was Romney was better than people expected, and Obama was unbelievably less capable than people expected, and it was the matchup that made it so extraordinary. One of the points that Craig Shirley's made in his book on the 1980 campaign, Rendezvous with Destiny, is that may be the one place where clearly the debate was decisive. I think Carter might well have won without that debate. But I would argue that the 1960 debate, Kennedy suddenly became a peer of Richard Nixon's, had vice president versus a young senator. Suddenly they're basically even after the first debate. And I think that what Romney did, if Romney had as bad a debate as Obama, we would be sitting here talking about the election being over. That's how big that first. Now, that still means there are 2 more rounds here. This is not over. But it does mean Romney got himself back into contention in one night.
Senator Dodd, you debated President Obama repeatedly in 2007, and as you sought the Democratic nomination. You were a big part of one of the most important moments in that series of Democratic primary debates. Let's show a clip from that.
Failed. We have failed.
No. You said yes.
No.
You thought it made sense to do it.
No, I didn't, Chris. But the point is, what are we going to do with all these illegal immigrants who are driving on the roads?
That's a legitimate issue, but driver's license goes too far.
Well, you may say that, but what is the identification? If somebody runs into you today who is an undocumented worker...
There's ways of dealing with that.
Well,
this is a privilege, not a right.
First of all, what's going through your mind in a moment like that? And also, just secondarily, do you buy the suggestion that President Obama is not a great debater and was overhyped?
Well, a lot of questions there. First of all, in that particular clip, all I was doing was asking the question I think the audience was asking itself at that moment. And obviously a difficult moment for Hillary Clinton because her governor in New York was advocating a position of granting licenses to people in the state and not wanting to put herself at odds with her own governor. So I asked the question that a moderator might have asked at that point. You have to answer the question. That's all really happened at that particular moment. I think George Will has it absolutely right about debates. I think debates that Newt Gingrich and I went through in a primary process are very different than what we're watching today at the presidential level, once your candidates are chosen. In this sense, we're dealing with constituencies where you have to check certain boxes in order to become a credible candidate. When you get to the presidential debate and they've been chosen, issues are still very important, don't misunderstand me. But I think George Will has it absolutely right. At that point, we're looking for something else. And these issues become portals of making decisions about whether or not this individual is capable of taking on the most important job in the world. And so they're important, but it's more about character, it's more about your ability to express the emotions the country is feeling, the difficulty they're going through, and therefore there's a significant difference, in my view, in terms of how the public looks at these engagements. We're only halfway there. There's 6 hours of presidential and vice presidential debates. 3 hours are yet to come. And I think we're getting ahead of ourselves in many ways by determining the race is over. Barack Obama is a very talented person. I served on 3 committees in the Senate with him, 2 committees, excuse me. Spent I don't know how many hours, as you point out, in these forums we're involved in. This is a very talented, committed individual who I think won the election in 2008 because he brings a passion and understanding of these issues. And I would be very careful about writing him off at this point, in my view. I think he'll come back very strongly on this coming week and thereafter. But obviously, we're talking about his coming back because of what happened. And clearly, he opened the door and energized the base, the Republican base, the independents who might have written him off entirely. So debates are important. What happened a week or so ago is important, but what remains to be done here is equally, if not more important.
Richard Norton Smith, Dick Nixon didn't have to deal with Facebook or Twitter or cable news even. Put this in a historical perspective for us. How much does that new media change what happens in a debate?
I think it transforms the experience of watching and assessing what it is we see. That clip from Saturday Night Live makes the point. In 1960, we had a shared experience. Close to half the population sat down. It was the first time that this had ever happened. Novelty was a huge factor. We had a lot fewer intermediaries interpreting what we were seeing. We saw it for ourselves. And the next day, we discussed it at the water cooler. Saturday Night Live has become our water cooler. And the debates over time have become an inseparable part of the pop culture, part of the 24/7 news cycle. And my hunch is, the other big thing, of course, is because of the social media, instead of watching and listening, we're commenting. We're offering our own instant analysis as the debate is unfolding. That has to change what the experience is, what you're getting out of it, what you're putting into it. And my hunch is, if you look at over time, the audiences for the debates in relative terms compared to the population has diminished. And I think correspondingly, to the extent that people see them as scripted entertainment events, I think they give less weight in determining how they vote.
Oh, interesting. Martha, in preparing for your moderating, you studied many, many past debates. What did you learn about what goes into a game-changing moment?
Well, I think one of the things in studying and looking back at all the debates is sort of exactly what we're talking about, too. Were they looking at the camera? Were they looking away? Were they gesturing in big ways? But it's also getting that message throughout the 90 minutes. I love always saying this. I completely agree with George Will on this. We all do about what it means. But it's that 90 minutes. You see those candidates for 90 entire minutes, and they have to get their message out. I mean, there were times sitting at that table, I could see both of them just thinking, okay, no, what haven't I said? What haven't I said? What haven't I said? Obviously, getting them off message is always the challenge. But I do think it's such a fascinating test to see them in that forum. And for the public to see for the first time them in that forum for 90 entire minutes.
George, have debates made differences before other than 1960?
Well, first of all, the most consequential debate in American history didn't involve presidential candidates. It involved 2 Illinois Senate candidates. Yeah. It was one of 7 in the Lincoln-Douglas debates. It was at Freeport when Lincoln asked the famous Freeport question. Stephen Douglas clearly, and to his detriment with the Democratic Party, endorsed popular sovereignty on slavery in the territories, and much American history flowed from that. But yes, they did. Look, Kennedy wins in 1960 by about 1 vote per precinct. So clearly the debate had to make that much difference. In 1976, Gerald Ford seemed to catalyze again the belief that he was perhaps befuddled when he got crosswise with himself on domination of Eastern Europe by the Soviet Union. In 1980, when Ronald Reagan said, "There you go again," people said, "He's not a madman at all. He's a perfectly nice fellow." In 1988, when Michael Dukakis was asked about capital punishment and his wife, people said, "He's cold and he's a technocrat and we don't much care for that." 1992, President Bush looked at his watch and people said, "He's detached, he doesn't really care for us." And then, Donna, there were the sighs on the part of Al Gore, and people said, "He's a bit of a stuffed shirt."
Well, you know, it's interesting. In terms of Saturday Night Live, the importance of Saturday Night Live, Gore aides actually made Al Gore watch Saturday Night Live's representation of that first debate to show him how he was perceived. Do we make too big a deal out of these stylistic things, Joe Biden's smiles, Al Gore's sighs?
I mean, when you're preparing someone for these historic gatherings, you're focused on the substance. I mean, here are the policy positions, here's what your opponent is saying, and this is how you counter it. But when you get there and all of a sudden it's stagecraft and you're like, the eyes and the movement of the hands.
And the split screen.
And the split screen. I mean, it's, you know, I'm sure now President Obama will be advised to look up, smile, and don't roll his eye, just stay focused on Candy Crowley or the person. I mean, and this next debate is even more important because you're connecting with the questioner, the real people at this town hall debate. But George mentioned, I was looking at all of these numbers, 84, Reagan botched the first one. He said he was overtrained, over-prepared, and he wasn't quite ready for that first encounter with Walter Mondale. And also in 2004, when, once again, the negotiations and the Bush people said that they wanted the first question on national security. And George Bush was not prepared. John Kerry was, and he tightened that race.
Speaker Gingrich, I want to ask you, the president was criticized for seeming lackluster in his responses. Do you think the stylistic things matter?
Well, I think George had it right in the sense that this is, the character is a part of what, ultimately, you don't know what crisis will emerge a year from now. And the character, the nature of the person does matter. And I actually think you had it right that 90 minutes with no editing, no breaks, you begin to watch these two people interact with the moderator. You get a different sense than you do from TV commercials. I thought Romney, frankly, was helped because the Obama campaign spent 3 months portraying him as a person he's not. And people saw him and said, wait a second, that's not the guy I've been frightened about. Just as Reagan in 1980 suddenly was a lot more reasonable than the Carter caricature of him. So these things do matter, I think. And I think that the challenge for President Obama was a little bit like George H.W. Bush. I mean, I got the sense that first night that he wasn't there to compete. I mean, he you know, if you wanted to give him the presidency again, it'd be all right, and he'd be happy to show up. But he wasn't there saying, here's what I have done, here's what I will do, here's why it matters. And that came through, and I think Obama was a much bigger shock in the first debate than Romney was.
In thinking about whether these debates are important or should be as important as they are, just imagine we had the Lincoln-Douglas format. First person talked for an hour. Second person talked for an hour and a half, and then the first person responded to that. They did this 7 times without amplified sound and in front of audiences, none of whom could vote for them because state legislatures at that time elected the senators.
Good luck pitching that to the Commission on Presidential Debates. Senator Dodd, is the debate aftermath just as important? The spin?
Oh, sure. The point made earlier about this is, I suspect the next cycle of debates will involve interactivity to some degree, I suppose, where people are literally going to have on a screen, not just a split screen of the candidates, but actually the comments that are being made by the public at large as you continue to debate. So we're going to see, I think, a generation of new technology providing even greater opportunities for interactivity. But the after is critically important. And again, the commentary that goes on, we don't have the opportunity any longer to sort of think about what we've seen and then react to it. We're being told instantaneously how you're supposed to react to it. And so that makes a difference. But also how the candidates and their teams react. Just one quick anecdote. I remember there was a bill signing ceremony with President Reagan after the first debate, very shortly thereafter. And I thought, well, I'm going to get down, not because I just want to be at the bill signing, but I want to see how the president's reacting. And I'll never forget walking into the Oval Office with him. And it was the night before he'd gone to a movie. I'll never forget it. He was, well, come on in. Can I get you a cup of coffee? Go on. I'm thinking to myself, he was just devastated last night, and he ought to be in a corner sort of weeping. But his reaction was, that was last night, this is today, and you move forward. And I think it's wise for these candidates and their teams, once the debate is over, move forward. The fact that we've been dwelling on this for the last 10 days, in fact, the president's team in itself dwelling on it, I don't think helps at all. I think you have to move beyond this. And so not only how the media deals with it, but also how the campaigns deal with it, I think can also sustain these impressions, and they need to put it behind them. I think
we have about a minute left in this section of the show. Martha, my first reaction after the debate was, wow, this is a big night for Jason Sudeikis, the guy who plays Joe Biden on Saturday Night Live. When you're up there on the stage, can you tell what's going to take hold in the public's mind?
Well, let me tell you one thing. For instance, I didn't see Paul Ryan drinking all that water, ever. Because when I was asking, because you're so in the moment and you're asking Joe Biden a question. But I think right away you knew what the strategy was. But one of the things I think Joe Biden did was in that intimate in that little intimate table, it was very small, he was too big. He was like he was at a campaign event. So you could feel that, especially at that table, that Joe Biden was so aggressive. So there were surprises there. I was surprised at Paul Ryan that he didn't jump in more, but that was clearly the strategy. But when you walk off, you're not quite sure how it went.